Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Gochner. Glad you're joining us today. I direct the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, and we are excited to welcome you to our virtual Newsmaker breakfast. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into our topic today. We have disabled the share screen and audio features for all of you, except for our panelists, but we would like you, and you are able to submit your questions through the chat box feature. We encourage you to do so, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the final half hour of our program. Our communications director, Nick Thuriot, will help facilitate that and watch for your questions and feed them to me. So let's open up the dialogue. Our topic today is Utah's economically disadvantaged students in higher education. Many economically disadvantaged Utahns never enroll in higher education institutions. Those that do are often less likely to complete their degree or certificate than others. Measuring economic disadvantage in higher education and pursuing interventions that will improve outcomes for students will greatly impact their futures and provide additional talent for our state's growing workforce needs. Today, we are excited to be joined by several state education leaders and researchers who will discuss potential policy interventions and other paths to improve educational outcomes for all Utahns. The Gardner Institute today will release a new policy brief. And so before we turn to our education leaders panelists, I'd like to turn the time over to my colleague, Gardner Institute Research Associate Andrea Brandley, who will share highlights from the latest policy brief. Andrea, we'll turn the time to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you today. As Natalie mentioned, we're releasing a policy brief today on this topic, and it's broken out into 8 key points that you can see on your screen. So I just wanted to briefly walk through each of these points to kind of level set us for our conversation today. So the first point is that education creates greater economic opportunity, and we see this across many different economic measures. The first one we'll look at is the unemployment rate. So this is showing Utah's unemployment rate by educational attainment. And as you can see, the higher the educational attainment, the lower the unemployment rate. So here at bachelor's degree or higher, we're at 1.5%, 2% for those with some college or an associate degree. And then it just gets higher and higher, the less educational attainment a population has on average. And then we see a very similar pattern when we look at the poverty rate. So this is showing Utah's poverty rate by educational attainment. And if you just compare, the highest and the lowest, bachelor's degree or higher at 3.9%, the poverty rate is 4 times higher for those with less than a high school diploma at 16%. And then again, another similar graphic as we look at Utah's median annual income by educational attainment, we see this same graded association as educational attainment increases, the median annual income increases. And then finally, when we look at economic mobility, this is showing the share of children with family income above their parents' family income based on the child's education level. So those with a college degree are more than 10 percentage points higher, more likely to earn more than their parents did than those without the college degree. So we see this pattern of education creating more economic opportunity, across different economic metrics. Today, we're focusing on economically disadvantaged students. So I want to acknowledge how income level and educational attainment are closely tied. And you can see that in this graphic here. So on the left, you'll see we've split Utahns into 3 income categories: lower income, middle income, and higher income, with about 50% of our population falling in that middle income category. And then you see the educational attainment across the graphic. The darker the brown, the higher the educational attainment. So again, if we just look at the highest level of bachelor's degree or higher, we see our lower income population, about 21.4% of them have a bachelor's degree or higher. This jumps by 10% for the middle income group, and then by another 20% when we look at the higher income population. And it's important to note as well that this relationship is bidirectional. So those with lower levels of educational attainment often end up having lower income. Those with lower income often have a harder time with educational attainment. So this bidirectional relationship can create a cyclical problem, posing barriers for the economically disadvantaged population to improving both their income and their educational attainment. So next, we're going to get into some education-specific data. So economically disadvantaged students enroll in and complete college at lower rates than their non-economically disadvantaged peers. And when showing Utah data throughout the rest of this presentation, economic disadvantaged is measured as qualifying for free or reduced price lunch in K-12 schools. This measure is roughly 185, coming from a household that's 185% of the poverty level or lower. And just for context, about 1/3 of our K-12 students in the state qualify for free or reduced lunch or considered economically disadvantaged. So the first graphic is showing Utah college enrollment within 5 years of graduating high school based on economic disadvantage. So if we just look all the way at the right where it says it has the number 5, we can see that 74% of those not economically disadvantaged have enrolled in college within 5 years of graduating high school, compared to only 56% of those who are economically disadvantaged. And then after people have enrolled, we continue to see a fairly large gap in college completion. So of those who do enroll, this is showing Utah's college completion within 8 years of graduating high school. And we see about 55% of those not economically disadvantaged have completed their degree or certificate, compared to 38% of those who are economically disadvantaged. So why is this? And I think there are a lot of intuitive reasons for this gap, but I do want to discuss some of the many barriers that economically disadvantaged students face to college enrollment and completion. The first one is academic preparedness. So this is showing Utah K-12 student achievement. If we start by looking at the 3 on the right, we see mathematics, English language arts, and science proficiency. And this is a measure of 3rd through 8th graders. So this is just to show that starting fairly young, we see these pretty large gaps between these two populations. This then continues through high school, as we see in things like ACT scores, GPA, high school graduation. And then, of course, as we've already seen, continues on into college in enrollment and completion data. And there are, of course, additional barriers, as you can see on the screen. Economically disadvantaged students are more likely to work more hours while enrolled in higher ed. They're more likely to delay enrollment or enroll part-time. They're also more likely to have other family obligations. They're more likely to have children or be a single parent, and more likely to be a first-generation college student, so may not have a parent there who's gone through the process to guide them through it. And then they're also less likely to engage in academic and social experiences and utilize support services. And then, of course, one of the most commonly discussed barriers is rising tuition costs. And these could pose a barrier for economically disadvantaged students, but we do also want to acknowledge how grant aid may help offset these costs. So this first graphic here is showing the average undergraduate resident tuition and fees for USHE degree granting institutions in red, and then US public institutions in gray. These are in inflation adjusted dollars, so you can see the steady increase in tuition and fees that we've seen over the last 20 years. It's about doubled in both Utah and the US as a whole. But we do also see that USHE's degree granting institutions have significantly lower tuition and fees than the US average. And then also want to acknowledge that financial aid has also increased over these years. So both the share of USHE students receiving aid and the average amount of aid has gone up from 2010 to 2020. And there's been research that has shown that published costs can deter low-income students, so that sticker shock of tuition prices can potentially deter them from enrolling or applying for college. But there's also been research to show that tailored recruiting can help with this. So recruiting that informs students of available aid, provides support in obtaining it, has been shown to increase enrollment of economically disadvantaged students. All right, so point number 6 is the share of students who are economically disadvantaged differs across USHE institutions. So we'll start by looking at our 8 degree granting institutions. For students whose economic status is known, so who we have that free reduced lunch data for, we see that a larger share of students enrolled in our community colleges come from an economically disadvantaged background. So at the bottom of the graphic, Snow College and Salt Lake Community College, about 26% of their student population is showing as economically disadvantaged, compared to approximately 16% for most of our regional and research institutions. Dixie State, or soon to be Utah Tech University, is kind of between those two groups. And then we also see a larger share of economically disadvantaged students at our technical colleges. So with the exception of Davis, all of our technical colleges have more than 20% of their students coming from that economically disadvantaged background. And we see rates at around 30% at Southwest and Ogden Weber technical colleges. So we always want to talk about some of the things that have been or can be done to improve outcomes for economically disadvantaged students. This is just to discuss briefly that many different interventions have been tried with varying impacts and that measurement poses challenges. So there's been quite a bit of research, many interventions that have been done to try to improve enrollment and or completion for economically disadvantaged students, and some that have shown a positive impact. Our impacts can vary fairly significantly across different populations and with different implementation. And I also just want to acknowledge that measurement poses challenges. There are many different possible measures of economic disadvantage in higher education that have different benefits and different challenges. And being able to find consistent, reliable measurement will be key to understanding the problem, measuring the impacts of interventions, and then being able to track progress through time. And hopefully our panelists will get to talk a little bit more about their experiences in interventions. And then finally, just want to acknowledge that education improves Utah's long-term future for everyone. Improving outcomes for economically disadvantaged students benefits not only these students, but society as a whole. As you can see on this table on the left, there are many individual benefits of education, but there are just as many or more benefits to society as more of the populace becomes or has the opportunity to receive higher education. For example, in fiscal year 2021, more than 55,000 degrees and certificates were awarded to Utah students, helping to provide more prepared employees for Utah's growing workforce needs. And with that, I want to pass the time back over to Natalie so that we can get started on our panel discussion.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really terrific. And you've distilled it into a really well-presented summary, and your expertise really comes through. So thank you for that. I'd now like to introduce our newsmakers. We are honored to have with us today President Denise Huftelin, the 8th president of Salt Lake Community College, a position she served in since September of 2014. Welcome, President Huftelin. We have Jim Taggart joining us, who's the president of the Ogden Weber Technical College. He's been in that role since June of 2017. And then we have Lisa Michelle Church joining us, who's a current board member of the Utah System of Higher Education, and as I understand it, the board chair-elect. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to ask just for a second, and Lisa, we'll start with you. Just a quick reaction to what you've heard Andrea present. What comes to mind when you see all of that information and that data?
Well, first of all, thank you to the Gardner Institute for confirming what most of us intuitively know. What strikes me is there's an information gap in our state and possibly a political will gap to address this. And I feel like the interventions we are trying to do in higher education are not always seen or supported. So I'm hoping to be able to talk about that, because I do think they match some of the interventions your report recognizes.
Yeah, I love that. This notion of this gap that you have to go after. President Huftelin, your reaction.
Yeah, let me echo Lisa Michelle's thanks to the Policy Institute, Andrea and Natalie. This information makes my heart sing a little. I don't like the information necessarily, but I do like how it paints such a vivid picture of the differential across post-secondary institutions. I have long said not all students are created equal in terms of how they access and succeed through higher education. And as a state, I think we have to be very, very willing to look at nuances and to look at policy and funding formulas that recognize and support those nuances. So this just kind of affirms, as Lisa Michelle said, things we've known intuitively and seen happen at Salt Lake Community College over the years that I've been here.
A confirmation. President Taggart, let's hear your quick reaction here.
Thank you. And I'll echo what both our board member, Lisa Michelle Church, and President Huftelin have talked about. The Board of Higher Education recognizes that post-secondary education has the potential to have the most significant impact on our economically disadvantaged students. Their strategic plan addresses this in 4 pillars of increasing access, making sure that we have affordability is not a barrier to access, ensuring that individuals who enroll in any of the USHE institutions complete. We do not want to increase the number of individuals who have some college, no degree, or no certificate. And then finally, that there is better workforce alignment, that individuals who complete certificates and degrees are having a return on that investment. One of the things that we're finding from many of our students, and this is pointed out in the policy brief, is cost is not the only factor and barrier to education. It's time. Time actually is, for many of our students, the largest commodity. And so I think that's the critical role that technical education and our community colleges play in one of our solutions, is having the shortest amount of time for an individual to receive a post-secondary credential and get to work. Many cannot delay going to work for 4+ years. We're also seeing a shift in some realities. In the past, you always went to college to get a job, and in today's market where unemployment is so low, we're seeing the inverse, which is individuals are getting a job and their employer sending them to work, which puts the burden on us and the wonderful opportunity to say, we can no longer have you stop out on your job in order to complete your education. We need to partner with you and your employer in finding innovative ways for you to complete your education faster and augment the career that you've already started.
Right. Thank you, President Huffelin. I'm thinking about, Salt Lake Community College showed up as among the degree granting institutions having the largest share of your student body that comes from economically disadvantaged background. Help us understand the access challenges that your students face.
Sure. So as you mentioned in my introduction, I've been at the president's role since 2014, but I've been at Salt Lake Community College for 30 years. And literally over the last 12 years, we've watched that college going rate slowly decline in Salt Lake County. And then, of course, with the pandemic, it just blew up and exacerbated that decline even more. We are the second largest county, and we're the most diverse, racially and ethnically diverse county. And so for me, I feel this like moral imperative to be the institution that provides the best access, the most affordable access, and gets these students through to completion. And I will say, when you say, Andrea's report says, they're more likely to be part-time students coming to Salt Lake Community College. It's true, but it's an understatement. So literally 10% of our students will take 15 credit hours or more, which I think in most people's mind, when you hear college, you think of a full-time student going to a university. And that is just simply not the case at Salt Lake Community College. Most of our students take 6 credit hours. So as Jim mentioned, they're taking time, and with time comes life. So your car breaks down, you have another child, you lose your job. And when those life things happen over that time period, it's much easier and frankly imperative for you to stop out. And when you stop out, you likely don't come back. So at least at a community college, we feel this kind of pressure to kind of hold it together for these students in a long sequence of events of semesters, to keep them here, to keep them focused, to keep them, healthy and financially secure. And that costs more money ultimately because of those wraparound services, tutoring, childcare, transportation, mental health, employment on campus instead of an In-N-Out burger, right? So all of those things, I think, Natalie, this report just helps, I think, paint that picture that our students are very, very different. And we as a state need to think about, what does that mean in terms of policy and funding and the will, as Lisa Michelle said, the will to do things a bit differently and have higher expectations.
Yeah. Lisa Michelle, and we can get the presidents to jump in here after, but how does it work in our state? In other words, you sit at the leadership helm of our governance of higher education institutions, obviously have a lot of interaction with our legislature. How do these decisions work in our state? Kind of break that down for our viewers. Lisa Michelle, hit that.
There we go. Sorry. So we have a higher ed board that now has a system as of 2 years ago that combines the tech colleges with the degree granting, which is really good news because that means the pathway is completely open. And the tech colleges are the actually unsung heroes of this discussion because they have, entry throughout the year. 6 months, you can get a job. You can be a welder in months worth of time. You can be a truck driver making almost three times what an average wage is in Utah. So to me, the unsung heroes are the fact that we have this tech college system that is now governed by our board, which matches with the degree granting system. And students have really 14 or 15 different options for where they go from high school. The problem is that with the K-12 partnership, there is a disconnect. There are some things that need to be addressed there. We need to have better communication with the families of the students coming in to know that. If the misperception is it's a 4-year education and you're going to have to delay family and job and things like that, then we've missed the boat. So to me, the good news is we govern a system with access, affordability, completion, and workforce alignment, just like President Taggart said. But for some reason, those pillars are being used by the people who already know how to get to college. They're not being used by the people who need the information. And it's like a good news, bad news joke to me, because we have the things that would help them. We have concurrent enrollment where you could get a degree or a certificate during your high school years. But guess what? Free lunch, reduced lunch kids don't go to concurrent enrollment. It costs money, it costs time, you have to get books, and they work after school. So to me, it's a mismatch because we have the resources, but we don't have the information coming across.
Yeah, that's interesting. President Taggart, I heard both Lisa Michelle and President Huffdalen essentially talk about wraparound services. How does that work in the technical college world? Is it a great need, and are there things that you're doing that people would find interesting?
Thank you. And that is something that we are finding a more significant need, not just with our economically disadvantaged students, but for all of our students. As the report points out, and our data shows, those economically disadvantaged students are more likely to have food insecurity issues. And so we have food pantries, having childcare issues. And so we try to have flexible scheduling where individuals can have, they're not on a set schedule. They may come Monday and Tuesdays in the morning and Thursdays and Fridays in the evening. To have some flexibility around when there is childcare. We are finding more and more of our students are unhoused and trying to come up with solutions to help them with those situations. Some of the things that we are doing to help with many of these issues, and we celebrated when we saw this report. We are focused very, very much on increasing access for all of our students. Both Ogden Weber Tech and Salt Lake Community College, which, as the study points out, have the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students, also are the most diverse in terms of historically underrepresented groups, with about 34 or 35%. And again, that's targeted. That's part of our strategic plan to increase those groups, because that is our mission in order to serve those individuals. So as Lisa Michelle pointed out, many of our programs can be completed in 6 months to a year, but just like Salt Lake Community College, we're seeing less than 18% of our students are going full-time. Most are going part-time. And they're coming to us and they're saying, I don't even have 6 months. I need to find a higher paying job right now. So working with our employer partners, we have created some very, very short-term training that can be completed in 3 months. And get individuals into a career pathway where they're earning a higher salary, and then they are having a partnership with our employers where they can then have a progression to complete a certificate and then associate and bachelor's degrees. In our region, we have a large percentage of our employers are part of advanced industries. This has to do with aerospace and manufacturing. And advanced industries pay higher at all post-secondary credential rates. So technical certificates, associate, bachelor's degrees pay higher than non-advanced industry areas. And we'll see that many of our certificates will actually have an earning power as high as bachelor's degrees in a non-advanced industry. So our employers in manufacturing have helped us develop a 3-month program as a manufacturing technician. They get employed at one of our aerospace or manufacturing companies, and then they help them as part of their training complete an additional tech certificate in machining, in welding, in non-destructive inspection, or in automation, in robotics. And that way they have removed that barrier of, I need to go to work. And now they're working in a field that they can build upon. And then after that, we have these great partnerships with our degree granting institutions to complete associates and bachelor's degrees. So what we're finding is the quickest way we can get them related employment to continue their education is a key strategy for helping those that are economically disadvantaged.
Thank you, President. I'm going to remind people to submit their questions. I've just got one more kind of little section of questions before we'll turn to your questions. I'm really fond of the first President Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. He's someone that I've followed, his thinking, his writings. He once had an education quote that's always stuck with me, where he said, and it's probably because of my background in public policy, but he said, think about every problem, every challenge we face, the solution to each starts with education, right? So I think of education as just this foundational public policy step that helps with everything else that we confront in our collective lives. So here's my question. Andrea, we'll bring you into this. Lisa Michelle, President Hufflin, President Taggart. Let's just say that we're having lunch together. We're sitting around a table, and Lisa Michelle's given us the good news that the legislature's asked us to come up with 3 things that we want our state to do to help expand opportunity for economically disadvantaged Utahns. So we get 3 things. So let's open up the lunch dialogue. What's on the list? Andrea, do you want to go first? We'll put the pressure on you for a second. You wrote this report. You're a trained public policy analyst. What would be on the list for you?
Sure. I think, and this is kind of mentioned in the policy brief, and Lisa Michelle Church mentioned it as well, but I think one of mine would be to just improve information. So whatever we can do to align across K-12 systems, higher education systems, and get quality information in a way that people can understand and relate to students and families as early as possible. I think that could make a pretty big difference in this policy realm.
That's terrific, right? Because that one is not very expensive. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to call you out. At least it looks like Lisa Michelle's unmuted, so you go.
Yeah. So my background is in, I was a director of Department of Human Services for the state, and also I was administrator of the juvenile court. So I want to echo what you said. The trajectory for families is set very early. And I just asked the policymakers, where do we want to be as a state in the next 10 years? Because I can tell you, and you guys have done reports at Kim Gardner, that the Utah Foundation has done one, that if we're going to consign these people to intergenerational poverty, then we are letting down the future of our state. Where's our workforce? Where's our advantage, which we have now? So yes, I've been thinking about this as the new chair of the board. My 3 would be, number 1, more FAFSA completion. Andrea does a great job of talking about, we are leaving $44 million on the table every year. If our students would take FAFSA and complete it before they graduate, they would qualify for Pell Grants, which don't have to be repaid. Big news flash to intergenerational poverty families. And then most of these schools, including Denise's, they top it off. They take whatever's left that Pell doesn't cover and they top it off to get them through school at very little cost. Number 2 would be these college access advisors that we have had in the high schools. We have them in 55 schools right now. We're getting them in 80 by next fall. They meet with each student in the senior class one-on-one. and their families, and they work on college planning, which can be what Jim Taggart talked about. It can be go to a 3-month program and get a certificate and start working and keep going. So college access advisors, proven thing, lots of studies that show if you meet with a college access advisor as a senior, you're, X% more likely to go to college. And the third thing for me is more intangible, but it's the political will to do things differently than we've done them in the state, because we have served our students well, but we haven't served all our students. And that requires a change in thinking. And I guess that's too big of a wish, but I'm still going to say it.
Very good. All right, presidents, we're at the table. Let's have your reaction.
So I'm going to jump in. I'm always, I just love this conversation, and I wish I could just wave a magic wand and make this happen, but I have 3 as well. One is, I would love, the college access advisors are a great start, and I love that program, and I want to fund it everywhere. And then I want to go into the middle schools with a similar kind of program. We're piloting it at Salt Lake Community College. So where our middle school families start, those kids and their families start to see themselves and their children as post-secondary material. And it's the whole idea of you can't afford it or you're not college material is gone, because we're speaking to them in their language, native language. We're showing them exactly what the ROI is, and we're showing them how they can access it financially. Gone is that whole, by 6th grade, 7th grade, students know that they're going to go to Ogden Weber, or they're going to go to Salt Lake Community College, or they're going to get a PhD. It's just not even a question anymore. That's number 1. Number 2, I think we need differential formulas for institutions that have disproportionate numbers of low to middle income students. It costs more to get those students through. Historically, the system of higher education has funded all institutions similarly based on FTE and budget. And I think that no longer works. Across the state, we know we have different populations all across the state, and we should be helping those schools, both K-12 and higher ed, who have disproportionately larger numbers of those students. We should give them more resources for those wraparound, tutoring, high touch services. And the last one would be for business leaders across the state to recognize the value of educational reimbursement for their employees, and to step into the role and say, you might have come to me with an associate's degree, but I see you're great, and I want to send you back to get your bachelor's because there's momentum here for you, and I'm going to pay for that. So collectively, from 6th grade till when they're in their middle of their career, we are, as a state, embracing education and making it financially possible.
Well said, President Huffelin. On your last point, our unemployment rate in Utah is below 2% right now. It's just, that's just off the charts. And this tight labor market, maybe on your last point, there's some promise that employers will start to recognize that they've got to keep investing in workers if they want
Right.
to. Yeah, right. Interesting. Okay, President Taggart, we're still around the table. The women have weighed in. What would you like?
I agree with the items that they have talked about. My 3 deal with a slightly different take as well. In the state of Utah, the legislature has made a significant investment in increasing access to the tech colleges. And so every high school student can attend a tech college tuition free while they're in high school. So it is tuition free concurrent enrollment. And it is, even though 1/3 of our students at Ogden Weber Tech are these early college secondary students, and that's why you see a large number of economically disadvantaged. Ogden School District has a large percentage of their students are on free and reduced lunch. The school district has found students that attend the tech college are more likely to graduate on time. So they encourage their students to have concurrent enrollment with the tech college because it increases their on-time high school completion, which has been a struggle for this institute, for that district. So these students are accessing some really high-tech STEM. Everything we do is STEM. We have students taking a machinist math course, which has some very, very advanced trigonometry. When they complete that, they get no high school math credit for that. This is college level. We have university students taking this math class. as a reverse transfer, and yet they cannot receive math credit for it because it's not approved by the State Board of Education. One of my wishes is that we had better integration in looking at what is happening at the tech colleges, and from a competency-based, how does that align? Not course for course, but at a competency-based. That's going to do two things. It's going to increase the number of our high school students that graduate on time, and it'll increase the number of our high school students who have completed a tech college certificate by the time they graduate. That leads to my second thing. I think as a state, we are seeing that we have shifted into a skills-based economy. 38% of our students at Ogden Weber Tech are adults who already have some college or a degree. They're seeing that tech certificates are not just a baseline for additional degrees. They're using it as a capstone on top of their bachelor's degree to show that they have skill attainment. If we as a state said everyone in our state has a high school diploma and everyone has a tech certificate, I think that would go long ways in giving people early wins that they can then build upon, and it would make the quickest and most cost-effective impact for our economy. Along those lines, Tennessee Promise is something that the state of Tennessee does, where individuals who are willing to go to a tech college or a community college, it is paid for. They have to fill out a FOSFA, and what the Pell Grant doesn't cover, Tennessee Promise does cover. My last and final thing, and this is inwardly looking, I'm pointing at the system of higher education. So this is our tech colleges and our community colleges and universities, is that we have to recognize that learning is not site specific. During the pandemic, we all moved into hybrid learning. As a tech college, we thought we can't do hybrid. Everything is hands-on. It has to be done on site. And that's not true. We have more hybrid. But when we think of hybrid, we think of this is what takes place on the campus, and this is what takes place at home. We're missing a third of where people spend, and that is at work. We have to recognize that significant learning and competency attainment takes place at work. We have to do a better job partnering with employers and recognizing the value of what individuals are learning on the job, with many times accessing equipment that we can't replicate. That's what's really going to increase our ability to have affordable completion and workforce alignment.
Very interesting. Hey, Lisa, our first question Lisa Michelle, the first question from the outside is going to come to you about governance, but really quickly before we do that, I'm just going to take moderator's privilege here. And Andrea, do you mind calling up your deck one more time? And I want you to show the third grade data. And the reason I'm taking a little privilege here is that if I were to put my one thing on the table, I would put on the table this intervention very, very early. And this data here. So you see mathematics proficiency and English language arts proficiency. Andrea, explain the background on those two numbers there, just what they're measuring.
Yeah, so these are measured. It's an average of 3rd through 8th grade RISE test scores. So it's the end of level tests in mathematics, English language arts, and science on the right, all 3rd through 8th grade. And I will just acknowledge quickly that the numbers are very low, both like for non-economically disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged. This is 2021 data, so we're seeing COVID-19 impacts here. So I do think that's important to acknowledge, but yes, large gaps across the population groups.
So my public policy instincts would say, get into K through 12 and address this issue. Looks like some of you are nodding. All right, you can take it down, Andrea. Lisa Michelle, we have a question from someone. They're asking if the U-sheet governance model that you described is unique to Utah, is it based off some other model? What was the background for shifting to that model?
Yeah, so there was a study, the year I got on what used to be the Board of Regents, there was a study by a group called NCHEMS, which I think is some sort of national consortium of higher education experts. And they came in our state, and I think it was for 2 years, studied it and came up with this proposal for the legislature. And Senator Ann Milner was a big proponent of it, former head of Weber State. So it was given to us from the experts, but we have made it our own. And we believe that it does give the best options for pathways. Wherever you want to enter, wherever you want to leave, you've got a choice in Utah now.
Yeah, very good. All right, for both of our presidents, we've got a question here about, are there specific plans in place to recruit and retain economically disadvantaged adult students rather than those just entering after high school? What's happening in the adult student world for economically disadvantaged, President Huffman, President Taggart?
Well, I would say probably, I'm going to guess President Taggart does this better than we do, honestly, but we have, as part of our recruitment arm, we have a whole kind of adult focused recruitment arm, and they are looking mostly at what he mentioned earlier, business partners, business and industry who have training needs, who have incumbent workers who are really great, but they just need to level up. So we do a lot of custom fit and short-term training for industries that gets those workers back on the school, back at campus. They start to take something that might just be one little, short-term certificate, but they start to get this idea that, oh, I can actually do this. And that kind of is a natural lead back to perhaps a degree, because we've exposed them to the fact that going back to school is you can do it. There's other people like you in that classroom. So I think our business partners are often the way we get the adult learners. But I will also say this to Natalie, to your point about early intervention. We know that when we can get into the middle schools and our high schools, for instance, we have a PACE program, which is in 9th through 12th and is doing what you're asking us to do, which is level those students up quickly before they get to college so they're not behind the 8 ball. So doing math proficiency and upskilling in English and math. When we start to work with those students in our 5 high schools that we're in, their parents become involved, and their parents often become our students as well. So even going through high school and middle school, you can attract the family members who perhaps didn't have the opportunity to go to school. And it's kind of this nice byproduct of having them come back to school together.
Okay. President Taggart, I know you'll have something to say here.
Well, one of the things that we have been looking at is Ogden Weber Tech helped fund a study by Weber State University on the number of adults in Weber County, and that's our service region, who do not have a high school diploma or equivalency. And a conservative estimate is there are 20,000 adults without a high school diploma or equivalency in our community. Completion of an adult high school diploma or equivalency falls under the purview of the State Board of Education. It's actually part of the K-12 system, not part of higher education. And so we have one service provider in our community, Weber Adult Education, which is part of Weber School District. They do a phenomenal job. But the burden is way too much just for one entity. And we have a responsibility, even though it's not our direct role and mission, to help those individuals complete a high school diploma and have access to post-secondary education. The Pell Grants that we've talked about, students cannot access a Pell Grant if they don't have a high school diploma or equivalency. So we have partnered with Weber Adult Ed. We have given them every single bit of spare space that we have on our campus, which we don't have a lot. And we are housing adult education programs on our campus. This has done a couple of things. Adults now can tell their family members, I'm not going to an adult high school program. They just say, I'm going to the tech college. That's where I'm going. They're not embarrassed that they have not completed a high school diploma, which many times their family members don't know that they don't have a high school diploma. Their employer doesn't know. The second thing that we're working on is that we have a pilot that we're waiting for approval from the State Board of Education, where an individual passes some basic competency tests, enrolls in a technical college certificate. When they complete that tech college certificate, embedded in that is their high school diploma. Right now, students can complete a tech certificate and do their adult high school completion parallel. They're doing 2 programs at the same time. They're working, they have family responsibilities. It's just too onerous for them. This is a single program that allows them to have a high school diploma. They get a tech certificate. They have 12 or more employers waiting to hire them. And we've seen this done successfully in other states to address economic and workforce constraints. And we think that this will lead out in the state in not only helping individuals get that high school diploma, but it's going to change their economic value overnight.
Interesting. Okay, we've got a question from a reporter asking about the on and off ramps in education. And the reporter is saying, what do we know about these on and off ramps where people get a certificate, work for a bit, they go back to get a BA or BS degree? And really ask the question, is it realistic to keep asking economically disadvantaged students to continuously go in and out of school when they have so much else going on? President Upland shook her head, so that you must have some thoughts here.
Well, I don't know the specific data about, what's the continuity and if you followed that trajectory, what percentage is actually completing those stackable credentials. I don't have that data. But what I do know is that we literally at Salt Lake Community College, our biggest pattern of enrollment is one semester and then they stop out. So we talk to our faculty and staff is those first 3 weeks of the semester are critical. If you don't capture their attention, make them feel like they belong, answer their question and get them connected to resources, and then help them through that whole semester successfully, it is very likely they're going to stop out thinking they're going to come back and they'll never come back. So I would argue, at least for us, there's a really wide off ramp and there's a really skinny on ramp. And I think we need to narrow that off ramp and keep them here as long as possible. I know life gets in the way, but that's what I want to say is if you've got almost like a concierge that's with you that whole first semester, when you say I'm leaving because my tire blew and I got to fix my tire, I can't afford it, that person helps you get the resources to stay. I think those off ramps are dangerous. I do think they work sometimes for folks, but they're also somewhat dangerous, especially as you mentioned with our unemployment rate so low. They take off, they go get a job, they think they're going to make money right now, which is great, but eventually they're going to need additional education.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the surprising part of our job, I chaired Student Affairs Committee the last 2 years, was how many basic needs are not being met when you're a student. We had a food insecurity study done by the Utah Food Coalition and also I think Weber State, and they said that 1 in 4 students miss meals to stay in school. Their housing, as President Taggart said. So for us, when you see those off ramps, it is a basic needs issue, and that calls out the whole society. What are we doing as a society to put education a priority for people? And it's economically disadvantaged, but it's also other students who just can't cope, childcare vouchers. Who knew that the school system would be in the business of that? But we have to be to keep them in school. And to me, that says, we've got to prioritize it farther out than just K through 12 and higher ed.
I have so many follow-up questions and questions are coming in here, but on this point of life getting in the way, you all have sort of mentioned that, and it really rings true for me. Andrea, I asked you questions I didn't give you any warning about, but my understanding is that the education level of a mother is a very strong predictor of someone's entrance and completion of higher ed. I see some nods, but Andrea, is that the way you understand the research?
Yeah, that's what I understand as well. Yes.
All right. So now we've got a family household situation where the mother is not has not completed a certificate degree. And now you've got all this complexity of life getting in the way. How do we do things? I'm familiar with a student that had a Pell Grant at a community college, moved to a 4-year institution, all of a sudden there's no Pell Grant. And it doesn't make sense. President Taggart, have you seen that before?
We have. We've seen it going both ways, where a student has completed a certificate here with their financial aid, and then they go to one of our stackable credentials to one of our university partners, and they struggle having that financial aid wraparound services. We make them start over in essence. We put another roadblock for completion. It's something that I talk with our degree granting presidents that we've got to do a better job in a handshake in how we transition those students from the tech college to the university. And so one of the things is we need to look at how do we get our financial aid folks working better together. Maybe we package the student for both their tech certificate, their associate degree, and their bachelor's degrees. We find that our most successful stackable credentials are nursing. So students who do our practical nursing program go right into a Weber State associate program. still on our campus with Weber State faculty. That handoff works really, really well. We just haven't been able to replicate it in other areas. It's a very, very narrow focused off-ramp. There are off-ramps, but they're kind of controlled by a licensure and by an employer. And so I think we need to do a better job within our system, making sure that we look at the whole student and not just the student as this is my student. This is a student that may be starting with me, but gets a job in Salt Lake, and I need to make sure that they can continue their education at Salt Lake Community College.
Yeah, interesting. This is a Utahn. This is a neighbor. This is someone in my community. Okay.
Yeah, we have a couple of examples, Natalie, of Southwest Tech is really next to Southern Utah University, and they have come up with a program where if you're enrolled at Southwest Tech, you can also do things at the university. And Mountain Lands Tech in Utah County has a program with Utah Valley University, which is called a pathways person. So the pathways person works with the person when they say, hey, I want to go from the tech to the university. The pathways person actually walks them over there physically, works with them, talks to the people. And just what President Taggart is saying about the handoff, I know Salt Lake Community College has that with University of Utah. So to me, we have got that. It's just not well known and it's underutilized.
Okay, we've got a question that's come in mentioning that you've all spoken about these ancillary services that are needed. Mentioned food insecurity, there's healthcare, flex timing, those sorts of things. What of the key ancillary services would make the biggest difference?
I wanted to share the reason that we started looking at kind of these equity funding formula and what would that look like statewide is we started looking at our TRIO students. So TRIO is a federally funded grant program that many institutions have had for years. Started in the 60s. It was really designed for a very small portion of our nation who was economically disadvantaged and needed additional support in college. The reality is that almost all of our students fit that demographic now. But when you look at TRIO students, they have a really strong case management advisor. So it's a small cohort, 120 students. The advisor knows them very well. They followed their whole class trajectory throughout the semester. They connect them with books if they can't afford books. They help them with a tutor if they can't afford a tutor. They connect them to our childcare center or their UTA pass or our food pantry. So it's really this advisor that's really holding them tight. And, supplemental instruction and some additional academic support. Those students have markedly different retention rates and completion rates than similar demographics that aren't involved in the TRIO program. So it is a tested, proven model. And if I could take that model and scale it across the institution, our completion rates would soar, but it's very expensive.
Okay. We have a couple of questions that have come in. I think it's really a thoughtful way of thinking about this. The person's asking, Title I funds in kindergarten through 12th grade, typically used to reduce classroom size for reading and math interventions. But the person says that these funds could also be used for family engagement. And in a related question, I don't know if it's the same person or not, there's a mention that you could use these legislative funds for classroom size reduction, reading and math interventions, and then apply the Title I funds to family, community-based involvement. I'd love to hear your reaction to that question. Lisa Michelle, in some
Sure.
way, it comes to legislative funding.
It does. And that's when I was talking earlier about the way we need to think about higher education and really K through 12, all of it together. It has to be a different thought process. And we can't say, the privacy of these families is so important that we can't contact them in middle school, right? There's just a certain amount of balancing that's taken place in our state that has left us without the tools to intervene earlier. And it is a philosophy in Utah. A lot of families don't apply for federal aid because they think, well, I don't need federal aid. And that's why we leave $44 million on the table. And it's really kind of got to change the way we approach it. What kind of state do we want in the future? Do we want a state that the attainment gaps continue to widen? Because to me, that is really the fundamental question. We've got the tools, but we're not using them for the right people. So the gap is actually widening. And so to me, the funding that comes from the legislature needs to be used for those interventions as soon as possible, and to very much tailor towards equity needs and attainment gaps being closed.
I might, Natalie, if I could just mention, there was a bill several years ago, I think sponsored by Senator Milner, that is it created a study about the WPU in public ed and some additional funding for what, at-risk students. How could that look differently if those funds were really targeted to economically disadvantaged students? That's still in process and it's still being studied. But my hypothesis is that if that could start closing those 3rd grade, 8th grade milestone gaps, because you're giving additional funds to institutions who have a disproportionate number of low-income students, in my mind, that funding should follow the student through a technical college degree, through a community college, through a university, because they're going to get better with that support in K-12, but they're probably still going to need support. Their economic, outcome doesn't change overnight. That funding should follow them. And should we be a state that is targeting those students early on and following them all the way along a post-secondary completion, whatever that means for them, and helping them financially be able to access that, not just access it, but finish and complete with the support they need.
Thank you, President Hufflin. President Taggart, no, you didn't unmute. Okay, let's do this. If you're okay, President Taggart, we've only got a couple minutes. I need each of you, and I'm going to include Andrea in the bunch, to just quickly give us a piece of advice that you would give. Let's give it to our Commissioner of Higher Education, Commissioner Woolstenhume. What advice would you give him to take all of these interventions, these innovations, these proven things to address something we know to be a problem? What advice would you give Commissioner Woolstenhume? President Taggart, we'll go you first. Then we'll go Andrea, Lisa Michelle, and then we'll end with President Hufflin.
Well, one of the things I can say is that Commissioner Woolstenhume knows this very well, having been both the former state commissioner for technical education and now the commissioner for higher education under our combined systems. But we have to make sure that we understand that post-secondary attainment does include a technical certificate. That if we just say degree only, we are missing out on the opportunities to change the trajectory for the state. One of the challenges, and you talk about measurement challenges in this study, one of the biggest challenges we have both in the state and nationally is that we do not track very well in our data the difference between a one-year tech certificate or an institutional certificate from a degree granting institution and some college. Sometimes it's lumped in with an associate degree, and a technical certificate and an associate degree in general studies are two different things. So we don't have that discrete data to say what is the impact of a technical certificate. And so I think that needs to be the mantra that we share. In the state of Utah, we want everyone to have some level of post-secondary completion, and that does include our tech college certificates.
Great. Andrea, your quick response?
Yeah, my response will be in line with my role as a researcher, but I think my advice would be to find a consistent, reliable measure of economic disadvantage that we can track through time, that we can use to measure the efficacy of different interventions so that we can really understand the problem to be able to address it effectively.
Thank you. Lisa Michelle.
Oh, the commissioner's so tired of hearing from me, but my advice is take this report and use it as ammunition to change the thought patterns of Utahns about how higher education is supported in our state.
President Hufflin, you get the last word.
Thanks, Andrea. You took one of mine, which was good economic disadvantage metric. I will say this, it's probably trickier than it seems, but I think several other states have mandated FAFSA completion as a high school graduation requirement with some significant opt-out options for those that need it. I think the Utah should adopt that.
Wow, very good. This has been a really interesting conversation. I want to really thank our guests. I want to thank Andrea Brandley for putting together this great policy brief. You can have access to it. Nick has put a link in our chat, but you can go to gardner.utah.edu. This concludes our Newsmaker breakfast. We'll resume our Newsmaker breakfast again in August. We hope we can see you in person once again at the Thomas S. Monson Center. If you have additional questions, comments, or feedback, please write us at gardnerinstitute@eccles.utah.edu. Thanks, everyone. Have a great summer.
Thank you.